The blizzard came down like the wrath of an angry god, turning the New Mexico high country into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. Jake Murdoch had been tracking the stolen horses for 3 days, and his stubbornness had finally caught up with him. The wind cut through his duster like it was made of paper, and his fingers had gone numb on the reins 2 hours ago. His horse, a sturdy roan named Copper, stumbled through drifts that reached past her knees, her breath coming in labored clouds. He should have turned back yesterday. Should have listened to the warnings from the ranch hands at the last outpost. Should have done a lot of things differently, but Jake Murdoch had never been good at should-haves. The cabin appeared through the swirling white like a mirage, so unexpected that Jake thought his freezing brain was playing tricks on him. It was small, tucked against a rock face that provided some shelter from the relentless wind, with smoke rising from a chimney that promised warmth and life. He didn't care who was inside or whether they'd welcome him. He was past the point of caring about anything except not dying in this godforsaken storm. He barely managed to get Copper into the lean-to shelter beside the cabin before his legs gave out. He stumbled to the door and pounded on it with fists he could no longer feel. The door opened so quickly he almost fell inside, and he found himself staring at 2 of the most beautiful women he'd ever seen, their dark eyes wide with alarm at the snow-covered apparition on their doorstep. "Please," he managed through chattering teeth. "Storm caught me." They didn't hesitate. Strong hands grabbed him and pulled him inside, and the warmth of the cabin hit him like a physical force. He heard voices speaking rapid Apache, though his frozen brain couldn't process the words. They sat him near the stone fireplace and began stripping off his ice-crusted coat and gloves with efficient movements. "Your horse?" one of them asked in English. "In the lean-to," Jake stammered. The taller of the 2 women disappeared outside, returning minutes later with a blast of cold air and snow. "Your horse is settled. She'll survive the night." She bolted the door against the storm and turned to study him with sharp, assessing eyes. "You might not, Cowboy. You're half frozen already." Jake tried to protest that he was fine, but his body betrayed him with violent shivers that made his teeth clack together. The 2 women exchanged looks that spoke volumes without words, the kind of silent communication that came from a lifetime together. "I'm Kaya," the taller one said, moving to a pot hanging over the fire. "This is my sister, Alu. You picked a bad day to play hero in the mountains." "Wasn't playing," Jake managed. "Horse thieves took 6 head from the Double R ranch. Been tracking them." Alu knelt beside him, pressing a warm cup into his shaking hands. "Drink. And forget about horse thieves tonight. This storm will last until morning at least. No one's going anywhere." The liquid was some kind of herbal tea, bitter but warming, and Jake drank it gratefully. As the feeling started returning to his extremities, it brought with it a painful tingling that made him wince. Kaya returned with a thick blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, her movements brisk but not unkind. "You're lucky you found us," she said. "Another hour out there and you'd be a frozen statue for the spring thaw to reveal." "Grateful," Jake said, his voice steadier now. "Didn't expect anyone to be living up here, especially not in winter." "This was our grandfather's hunting cabin," Alu explained, settling cross-legged on the other side of the fire. "We come here when we need space from the reservation, from the noise and the politics and all the people who think they know what's best for us." Jake studied them in the firelight. They looked to be in their mid-20s, with the kind of beauty that came from strength rather than delicacy. Kaya had her long black hair tied back in a practical braid, while Alu's fell loose around her shoulders. Both wore simple wool shirts and sturdy pants, dressed for utility rather than fashion. There was a wildness about them, a fierce independence that reminded Jake of the untamed horses he sometimes encountered in the high valleys. "I'm Jake," he offered belatedly. "Jake Murdoch. I work for the Double R, but I'm trying to start my own spread. Was, anyway, before the thieves hit us." "Those horses mean that much to you?" Kaya asked, her tone curious rather than judgmental. "They're everything," Jake admitted. "My stake, my future. I've been saving for 5 years to buy breeding stock. Those 6 mares were half my herd." The sisters exchanged another one of those silent conversations. Finally, Alu said, "We know the men you're tracking. They passed through here 2 days ago, watering their stolen horses at the creek before the snow hit." Jake sat up straighter, ignoring the protest from his stiff muscles. "You saw them? How many? Which way were they headed?" "Shut up, Cowboy," Kaya interrupted, her voice firm but not harsh. You're not going anywhere tonight, and questions can wait until you're not one step away from frostbite. Right now, you need food and rest. She moved to the cabin's small kitchen area and began preparing something that smelled incredible, the aroma of meat and spices filling the small space. Jake's stomach growled audibly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since dawn. Alu added more wood to the fire, building it up until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. As the night deepened and the storm howled outside, Jake found himself relaxing for the first time in days. They fed him a stew made with venison and root vegetables, thick and rich enough that Jake felt life flowing back into his limbs with each bite. The sisters ate with him, and gradually the conversation flowed more easily. They told him about their grandfather, a medicine man who had refused to give up the old ways even as the world changed around him. This cabin had been his sanctuary, and now it was theirs. He taught us to hunt, to track, to survive, Alu said, her eyes distant with memory. Said that Apache women had always been strong, that we were warriors in our own right. The government agents on the reservation didn't like him much. Thought he was filling our heads with dangerous ideas. Were they right? Jake asked. Kaya's laugh was sharp and bright. Depends on who you ask. We can outshoot most men, outtried nearly all of them, and we don't need anyone's permission to live our lives. If that's dangerous, then yes, we're very dangerous indeed. Jake believed them. There was something in the way they moved, a confident economy of motion that spoke of hard-earned skill. They weren't pretending at frontier competence, they embodied it. As the meal ended and the fire burned lower, Jake felt exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. His body had been running on pure stubbornness for the past 12 hours, and now that he was warm and fed, it was demanding rest. He tried to hide a yawn and failed spectacularly. You need to sleep, Kaya observed. But there's a problem, Cowboy. Jake looked around the small cabin. There was one bed against the far wall, large enough for two but certainly not for three. A couple of chairs, the table, and the floor space near the fire comprised the entire living area. I can sleep on the floor by the fire, he offered. I've done worse. Not tonight you won't, Alu said flatly. Look at yourself. You're still shivering, and your lips have a blue tint. You nearly died out there, and you're not out of danger yet. The cold got deeper into you than you realize. I'll be fine with the blanket. Shut up, Cowboy, both sisters said in unison, and despite everything, Jake had to smile at their synchronized exasperation. Kaya stood and began pulling additional blankets from a trunk. You're freezing. You're sleeping between us tonight. Body heat is the fastest way to warm someone with hypothermia, and you're not far from it. Jake felt his face grow hot, which was quite an achievement given how cold he still felt. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. We're telling, Alu interrupted. This isn't about propriety or modesty, Cowboy. This is about survival. Our grandfather taught us that pride is fine, but stupidity kills. I don't want to impose or make you uncomfortable. Do we look uncomfortable? Kaya asked, one eyebrow raised in challenge. We're practical women, Mr. Murdoch. We see a problem, we solve it. The problem is you're half frozen and there's only one bed and one real source of warmth. The solution is obvious. Jake started to protest again, but another violent shiver ran through him, making his teeth chatter. The sisters saw it, and their expressions shifted from amused to concerned. They moved in perfect coordination, like they'd done this 100 times before, though probably not with a strange cowboy. Come on, Alu said, taking his arm and pulling him toward the bed. We promise we don't bite. Well, Kaya might, but only if you snore. Despite his embarrassment, Jake found himself being guided to the bed. The sisters banked the fire carefully, ensuring it would last through the night without becoming dangerous, then extinguished the lanterns. In the dim glow of the coals, they helped Jake out of his boots and outer layer of clothes. He kept his long underwear on, grateful for even that minimal layer of modesty. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, stuffed with what felt like pine needles and covered with thick furs. Alu climbed in first, positioning herself against the wall. Then Jake, feeling more awkward than he had since he was a teenager at his first barn dance. Finally, Kaya settled in on the outer edge, effectively boxing him between them. Relax, Cowboy, Kaya murmured. You're stiff as a board, and that's not helping you get warm. This is just unusual, Jake admitted. Life is unusual, Alu said from his other side. Get used to it. They weren't touching him inappropriately, Everything about the arrangement was purely practical, but Jake was intensely aware of their warmth on either side of him. Despite his discomfort with the situation, the warmth of the two sisters on either side of him worked like magic. Within minutes, Jake felt the deep cold that had settled into his bones beginning to retreat. His shivers gradually subsided, replaced by a drowsy contentment that he couldn't fight even if he'd wanted to. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, with the fire crackling softly and two living furnaces pressed against him, Jake finally felt safe. He woke once in the deep hours of the night, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the presence of others in the bed. Kaya had shifted in her sleep, one arm draped across his chest, while Alu was pressed against his back like a warm shadow. For a moment, panic fluttered in his chest. This was far too intimate, too presumptuous, but then he remembered where he was and why, and he forced himself to breathe. They had saved his life. They were sharing their warmth not out of desire but out of necessity and kindness. He owed them more than he could repay, certainly more than his foolish embarrassment was worth. Jake closed his eyes and let the warmth pull him back under. When he woke again, gray dawn light was filtering through the cabin's single window, and he was alone in the bed. He sat up, his body protesting with a symphony of aches, and saw Kaya and Alu already up and moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. "Welcome back to the land of the living," Alu said, noticing he was awake. "How do you feel?" Jake took inventory. Stiff, sore, but fundamentally whole. His fingers and toes all had feeling, though they tingled uncomfortably. No signs of frostbite. Like I got trampled by a stampede, but all alive. Thanks to you both. Kaya brought him a cup of strong coffee, and Jake accepted it gratefully. Your horse is fine. We gave her grain and water this morning. The storm dumped about 2 feet of fresh snow, so traveling won't be easy, but it's possible. The men you're tracking won't have gotten far either, Alu added. That storm would have caught them just like it caught you. They're probably holed up in the old mining camp about 10 miles northeast of here. Jake's attention sharpened. You know where they are. We know where they would go, Kaya corrected. There aren't many places that offer shelter up here, and the mining camp is the closest substantial structure in the direction they were headed. If they had any sense, they'd have made for it before the storm hit. How can I get there? The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful looks. We can show you, Alu said finally. We were planning to head in that direction anyway. There are some trap lines we need to check. Jake shook his head immediately. I can't ask you to do that. You've already done more than enough. Again, Cowboy, you're not asking, Kaya said with a slight smile. We're telling. Besides, those men passed through our territory, watered their horses at our creek, probably ate game that belongs to us. That makes them our problem too. It could be dangerous, Jake warned. Both sisters gave him looks that made him feel foolish for even suggesting they couldn't handle themselves. Alu buckled on a gun belt with a well-worn Colt revolver, while Kaya collected a lever-action rifle from the corner. They moved with the same casual competence they'd shown with everything else, and Jake realized his warning had been patronizing at best, insulting at worst. Sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to suggest. We know what you meant, Kaya interrupted, but her tone was gentle. You're worried about us. That's almost sweet, in an annoying, patriarchal sort of way. But we've been taking care of ourselves in these mountains our whole lives. We'll be fine. They prepared for the journey with remarkable speed, packing supplies into saddlebags and readying 3 horses, Copper and 2 Apache ponies that looked small but sturdy. Jake helped as much as his still recovering body would allow, grateful for the opportunity to contribute after being rescued like a damsel in distress. The world outside was breathtakingly beautiful, transformed by snow into something pristine and dangerous. The sun reflected off the white landscape with blinding intensity, and Jake was grateful for the hat Kaya handed him. They set out in single file, with Alu leading on her spotted pony, Jake in the middle on Copper, and Kaya bringing up the rear. The journey was harder than Jake had anticipated. The snow was deep enough that the horses struggled, breaking through the crust with each step. But Alu seemed to know where she was going, choosing paths where the wind had blown the snow thinner or where rocks provided easier footing. They traveled in silence for the most part, saving their breath for the difficult ride. It was mid-afternoon when Alu raised her hand, signaling a stop. They had reached a ridge overlooking a small valley, and Jake could see the mining camp below, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around the dark mouth of an old mine shaft. Smoke rose from one of the structures, and in a makeshift corral, Jake counted 8 horses. 6 more than there should be, he murmured, his hand unconsciously moving to the rifle on his saddle. 3 men, Kaya said quietly, pointing to tracks in the snow. See how the pattern repeats. 3 different gaits, 3 different boot sizes. Jake looked at her with new respect. He'd been tracking for years, but she read the signs as easily as he might read a newspaper. Can you tell anything else? They're confident, Alu answered. Not worried about being followed. See how the tracks wander. They took their time getting to the camp, probably didn't even post a watch during the storm. So what's the plan, Cowboy? Kaya asked. You want your horses back, and we're willing to help, but you're the one with the claim here. How do you want to handle this? Jake considered. 3 against 3, but he had no right to risk the sisters' lives for his property. Still, he knew they wouldn't back down if he asked them to. They'd made their decision to help, and he was learning that arguing with these 2 was an exercise in futility. We approach openly, he said finally. If they're willing to talk, I'll offer to buy the horses back, no questions asked. If they're not willing to talk. He let the sentence hang. Then we take them back the hard way, Alu finished with a wolfish grin. They descended from the ridge carefully, making no attempt at stealth. Jake wanted the thieves to see them coming, to have time to consider their options. As they entered the camp, a man emerged from the largest building, a rifle cradled in his arms but not yet raised. That's far enough, the man called out. He was big, with a thick beard and suspicious eyes. This is private property. Private property built on public land with stolen materials, Kaya called back. But we're not here about that. We're here about the 6 horses you stole from the Double R Ranch 3 days ago. The man's eyes narrowed, flicking between the 3 riders. 2 more men emerged from the building, both armed. Don't know what you're talking about, lady. These horses came with the property. Funny, Jake said, keeping his voice level. Because that paint mare in the corral has the Double R brand clear on her left flank, and unless this mining camp has been raising registered stock, I'd say you're lying through your teeth. The tension ratcheted up several notches. The thieves' hands moved closer to their weapons, and Jake could feel the situation teetering on the edge of violence. Then Alu did something unexpected. She laughed, the sound bright and utterly fearless in the cold air. You boys really want to do this? She asked. 3 of you against 3 of us, and you're looking at 2 Apache women who've been hunting these mountains since before you learned to wipe your own asses. Plus 1 angry cowboy who tracked you through a blizzard. Those aren't good odds, no matter how you calculate them. The leader hesitated, seeing the truth in Alu's words. They weren't looking at helpless travelers or an easy mark. They were looking at people who knew exactly what they were doing and weren't afraid of a fight. Jake pressed the advantage. I'm willing to make this easy, he said. Let me take my 6 horses and ride out. You keep whatever else you've got here, and we all forget this happened. No law, no violence, no problems. The thieves conferred in low voices while Jake and the sisters waited with practiced patience. Finally, the leader nodded reluctantly. Take your horses and get out. But if we see you again. You won't, Jake promised, already dismounting. With Kaya and Alu covering him, he entered the corral and quickly identified his 6 mares. They recognized him, whickering softly as he checked them over. They were thin and tired but unharmed. He fashioned a lead line and brought them out, acutely aware of the thieves watching his every move. Only when they were clear of the camp, heading back toward the cabin with the recovered horses in tow, did Jake allow himself to relax. The sisters rode on either side of him, alert but not tense, and he realized they'd probably never been worried at all. They had assessed the situation, calculated the odds, and known exactly how it would play out. Thank you, Jake said, inadequate words for what they'd done. For everything. The shelter, the warmth, the help with the horses. I'd be dead without you, and I'd have lost everything even if I'd somehow survived. You're welcome, Cowboy, Kaya said with a genuine smile. Though you might want to work on your timing. Next time you decide to track horse thieves into the high country, maybe check the weather first. Next time, Jake agreed. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered world in shades of gold and pink. Jake knew he should keep riding, push on to lower elevations before dark, but he found himself reluctant to leave. The sisters seemed to sense his hesitation. Stay tonight, Alu offered. One more night won't hurt, and the horses could use the rest. Tomorrow you can head back to your ranch with a clear conscience and all your property intact. Jake agreed, grateful for the reprieve. That night, they shared another meal, and the conversation flowed easily, full of stories and laughter. When it came time to sleep, Jake didn't protest when the sisters directed him to the bed again. This time there was no awkwardness, no embarrassment, just the comfortable warmth of allies who had faced danger together and emerged victorious. In the morning, Jake prepared to leave with genuine reluctance. If you ever need anything, he said as he tightened Copper's cinch, anything at all, you come find me at the Double R. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. We'll remember that, Jake Murdoch, Kaya said, and there was something in her eyes that suggested she might actually take him up on the offer someday. As Jake rode away, leading his recovered horses through the melting snow, he looked back once to see the two sisters standing in front of their grandfather's cabin, watching him go. They raised their hands in farewell, and he returned the gesture, knowing he'd never forget. The night the blizzard brought him to their door, or the two Apache women who'd saved his life with the simple command, "Shut up, cowboy. You're freezing. You're sleeping between us tonight."